Hi, it's Lee from the Japanese Water Gardens. In this video, I want to talk to you about the thing that everybody's talking about. It's the rises in energy prices and how that affects us as pond keepers. So let's start by taking a look at these 4 ponds that we've got at the water gardens. Now, it is the end of the season now, and most of the ponds have been shut down. But we still have these 4 ponds running here. And just quickly to go through how these work, there's 4 ponds which total about 3,600 gallons in volume, and each of them has a single bottom drain located in the bottom of the pond, and those bottom drains feed through into this old-fashioned gravity-fed multi-bay filter. It's a really simple filter where you have a vortex for spinning the heavy solids and settling them in here, a mechanical chamber for sifting out the fine particles that are suspended in the water and helping to clarify the water, and then a big biochamber where all the bacteria live that purify the water and keep it fit and healthy for the fish. Now, in terms of electrical usage on this pond, there's really 3 things that are on all the time. The first thing is, of course, the pump. Now, we have 2 of these pumps on this pond, and they're about 50 watts each in consumption. I don't know if you can see that one down there, but these are really small compact pumps, and they circulate the water through the pipework back to the pond. And on one of the returns, the water goes through this, which is a 55 watt UV. That's there to clarify the water to prevent you getting a buildup of green water algae. And that's obviously 55 watts again. So we're up to 105 watts now. 155 watts. We also have an air pump. That is about 30 watts in power, I believe. And that's there to keep the water surface moving, to keep the water turned over, and make sure that the fish have got plenty of oxygen. That air pump is not actually on at the moment, and we're going to come to that in a bit. So the running cost of this pond, how much would that be in a year? Well, before I made this video, I actually waited because I wanted to see what would happen with all those prices and the cap and everything. So at the moment we're running, let's be generous, we're running about 190 watts of power on this pond. So it's not a huge amount, but it is significant. So in a year, based on the current cap, I would expect that these ponds would use about 500 quid in electricity. Now, just to be clear, that's £500 for all 4 of these ponds, not individually. I should really have described them as tanks, and then that would have made more sense. Now, to give you an idea of how different some ponds could be to the ones that we're running here, about a month ago, I visited a pond to do some basic servicing on a filter system. And I came across this pump. The pond was about 1,000 gallons in size, and I noticed that on the filter they were running a valve, and that valve was almost completely shut. When you opened up the valve, the water came surging into the filter with such force that it was overflowing the filter. So the customer had fitted a valve in place to restrict the flow. I was intrigued to have a look at just how powerful the pump was, so pulled it out of the pond, scraped all of the algae off the plate that's on the side, and to my horror, came across this, 620 watts. Now, that, running for a year on a pond, cost over £1,600. So, let's get on with some tips to help you save money and not have the same problem as this. My first tip is to buy a pump that's actually designed for use on a pond. Don't be tempted to go into somewhere like Screwfix and buy a maintenance pump. Those kind of things are designed to empty a cellar after a flood, and the running costs of them can be frightening. A proper pond pump will be reasonable in wattage, and it will be a reliable, robust appliance that you'll have for your pond for years. Recently, a new type of pump has become available which has got a control unit attached to it. And the benefit of this kind of thing is that you can precisely dial in the exact flow that you want. If you turn the pump up, it'll consume more electricity, but the flow goes up. As you turn the pump down, the flow will go down and you'll use less electricity. It's not obvious how big a pump you actually want on a pond. And if you're not sure, then a pump like this makes a great choice. Now, tip number 2 is to choose the right size UV for your pond. This is really easy. A basic rule of thumb is that you need 10 watts per 1,000 gallons. This will suffice in all but the most extreme conditions. So this 55 watt UV would do a 5,500 gallon pond. A 25 watt UV, that would do a 2,500 gallon pond. There's nothing to be gained by going massive on a UV. Now, a few people have asked me whether or not they need to run a UV right through the year. Would it be possible, for example, to run a UV for perhaps 6 or 7 months a year and turn it off during the winter time? The answer to that is probably yes, and you could certainly try it, because the worst that would happen if you switched off the UV is the water would go murky, and then you'd have to click it back on, wait a week or so, and the water clarity would come back. Tip number 3 is about air pumps. Air pumps are really important on a koi pond because they maintain the movement of the water and they maintain a good level of dissolved oxygen for the fish. But it's certainly possible to run an air pump for just a few months during the year. Most of the time in the winter, the temperatures will be so low that the fish are inactive and their requirement for oxygen is quite low. So it would be perfectly permissible to turn off your air pump in winter. Another option to doing that would be to buy a second air pump, a much smaller air pump, and run one of those through the colder months. Tip number 4 is to watch some videos from other YouTubers. I noticed that Andy, on his Koi Pond Lifestyle channel, has been posting some good content recently. He was actually at our shop not that long ago, and we were talking about the energy pricing.
From the top of the water, whereas I put my covers on and there's a gap in the covers. So, I don't know, I've always been told though that, you know, you shouldn't cover the pond water because of the letting the gases out, but...
Also, there is the Devon Koi Pond channel. He has been doing some videos about his solar-powered pond system. Proper solar-powered pond systems will become more common as the technology improves. Right, for tip number 5, let's see what Matthew's got to say on the matter. Matthew, tips for people that want to save money on their ponds.
Make a good job of your pipe work. Use a decent diameter pipe to let lots of water through without any restrictions, and use as few bends as possible.
Yeah, what Matthew's on about is that people will run a massive, great big pump, but they'll put tiny restrictive pipe work on it. Use decent pipe work. Anything else? Just think a little bit outside the box. What's no one going to have thought of?
Maybe when you're doing your filters, if you're building it from scratch, use a gravity-fed filter rather than a pump-fed. Pump feds are usually higher. You have to pump up against gravity. Uses a bit more wattage on the pump.
I like it.
Whereas a gravity-fed, you don't have to have any lift. So you could go gravity to the filter and pump straight through back to your pond.
So that means plan your pond in the beginning properly. Do a good job of the filtration system. Design it so that it'll be a low wattage system.
Minimum amount of lift on the water. Big pipe work, and you'll get the maximum out of your pump.
Any more big tips for how they can save money?
No.
Do you know, we hadn't really mentioned pond lighting. I don't think that'd be use much electricity, do you?
No, most of the pond lights now are LED rather than halogen like they used to be. And they tend to be between about 1.5 to 5 watts, so I think it'll be very little on pond lighting.
Negligible.
Negligible. And don't have to be on very long either.
Okay, thanks for your help, Matthew. Cheers.
No problem.
Let's ask Wendy if she's got any tips. This will be tip number... Well, I forgot what number we're up to with tips.
You sound like you've had it all covered then, Lee. How can I help you?
Have you got any tips to help people save money on their ponds?
Well, the electricity crisis, as they're calling it, is a real hot subject at the moment. And it did cause a lot of anxiety for people.
Yeah.
I've never looked into my electricity bills at home before, but even I've started to check them when they come in, check my meter readings, etc., check my rate I'm paying.
Well, that's a good tip in itself, to check what you're paying and know how to work it out.
The one thing that I was concerned with, because we've recently installed a pond at home, was if that was going to escalate my bills. So I did a simple calculation to see how much my pond was going to cost me a year.
And
the pond is 1,000 gallons that I've got, and I'm currently running this Pondtech 5000 pump on it, and I have this Filter Clear 31,000 litre, which runs the pond fantastically. The water's lovely and clear. Worked it out that for an annual figure of these two items, it's coming to about £310.
oh, so not an absolute fortune.
No, and I'm happy with that. If you want to divide it into 52, it works out at £6 a week. It's a bottle of wine.
Half the price of a pack of cigarettes.
Yeah, I don't smoke, so that's not my problem, but I do drink.
Well, I don't smoke either, but it's not an absolute fortune then.
But one bottle of wine. And for me, it's worth it. And I was pleasantly surprised. So all the things that the media have been saying, it doesn't sound that bad to me. So I've stopped worrying.
I think the thing is what, now they've actually decided and they've capped the price, and that is one of the reasons I waited for making this video.
Yes.
I wanted there to be a definite decision about what price it was going to be. So when I made this video, the figures that we were coming up with were relevant.
Yeah, and my figures are relevant because, as I say, I am checking my meter readings and I'm checking my unit rate. What about pond heaters then, Lee? Where do you stand on those?
Yeah, pond heaters, that's
a bit more tricky, but
a bit more tricky, but I think I might have to go back outside. When I was out here earlier on, I didn't mention this thing. It's a pond heater, an inline electric pond heater. It might surprise you to hear that I don't actually recommend anybody heats a pond. But what I do recommend is that during the winter, you stabilize the pond temperature. And to do that, you can use an appliance like this. This is a 3 kilowatt inline electric heater. And if you used it sensibly, it won't be a major problem. If you don't use it sensibly, this kind of thing can cost you an absolute fortune. A 3 kilowatt heater running 24/7 will quickly run into hundreds of pounds in heating. But what I'm suggesting that you do with this thing is that you use it to stabilize your pond temperature. Now, that means setting the temperature through the winter. This is December, January and February, to a temperature of about 10 degrees C, and insulating the hell out of your pond. When we heat this big pond over here, this one through winter, we take 4-inch sheets of polystyrene and float it directly on the water surface. That way it traps all of the heat that we're generating in the pond. And it can make a dramatic difference to the cost of the heating. Without that polystyrene in place, the heating bill on a pond like this, using a conventional heater, could be astronomical. Now, a lot of people will be wondering why we're not using heat pumps. And if your main goal was to raise the temperature significantly up to 15 or 20 degrees C, then absolutely a heat pump is the way to do it. But I genuinely don't believe that you need to do that. Koi don't like big fluctuations in temperature. And during the winter months, the average temperature in the UK is about 8 or 9 degrees. So if you set that dial on your heater to about 9 or 10 degrees and you insulate your pond, you'll stabilize the temperature, you'll prevent those big dips in temperature. And you'll prevent the water from becoming dangerously cold, where it might start freezing up the pond and damaging your pipework. And it will prevent your fish from becoming tired out with constant changes in temperature. The key to eating a pond cheaply is to insulate the hell out of it. If you'd like to find out how much your pond is costing to run, then I made a video a year or two back called How much does it cost to run a pond? I'll put a link to it down in the description, and all that you'd need to do to bring it up to date is change the unit rate to about 30 pence per kilowatt hour. Do remember to check out some of those other YouTubers that I mentioned. And I'm going to say goodbye for now. I hope that you found this video interesting. If you did, give it a like, put a comment in the comment section below. I'll say bye for now from Lee at the Japanese Water Gardens.